Okay, let's start kind of getting everybody together, get seated. We'll still have some people come rolling in. I have a ton to get through today, as always. Once Tim Wood sits down, then we'll get started. And as usual, Tim never listens to me or anything.
I heard you, Jim.
No.
I didn't know you 3 times.
Okay, so we're in Jude. Last week we had a lot smaller group. It was probably half this. And I know a lot of you're kind of in here and then you're not. And that's great. That's fantastic. But I want to say this. This is why we keep showing you this. Because I simply cannot go over the same material week after week after week. I've been spending 3 weeks trying to get out of one verse. Okay? And last week was phenomenal. Those of you that were not in here, because we got it. I finally shut up and somebody asked a great question. Is Donna in here? Yeah. Donna, I'm almost going to make you come sit up here so that you're closer to the microphone. Because when you ask questions, that doesn't hear it. And I forget to repeat it, and then it's not on the video, but that's okay. We got into a great discussion last week, and I'm glad we did. We talked a lot more about Enoch and whether that's something that we can trust or not. I am not going to go back over all of that again, or I will not get through any of this today. I want to keep moving forward. Know that there's videos. These decks are available online. You go to the website, media, video teaching messages. They're all right there. Okay. I'm using the same deck probably for at least 3 or 4 weeks because it's like 50 slides long. And I'm just using that one as we kind of move forward. But I want to start tying these together because I know a lot of you have been looking at me like I have three heads, which actually I probably just have a third of a head, but on some of this material because it's new and it's really different and it's really stretched us, and that's okay. But I want to start tying this together. I want to start tying all of these passages together so you can see it. And then at the end of all of this, Anthony and I, we're just trying to get through Jude, and it's just one chapter, but it is just full of stuff that most of us have never thought about or really studied or seen how the dots connect. Okay, so I'm not going to reread 1 through 5. If you've got your Bibles, turn to Jude. Today we're going to be camped probably again mostly at 6, but I want to get through 6, 7, and 8. This is a section that I'm trying to tie together. So Jude 6. And the angels who did not stay within their own position of authority, but left their proper dwelling, Jesus has kept in eternal chains under gloomy darkness until the judgment of the great day. And again, I use the ESV version, so all of the text that I'm reading today is out of ESV, so it may not line up exactly if you're in the NIV or American Standard Version. Jude 7, just as Sodom and Gomorrah and the surrounding cities, which likewise indulged in sexual immorality and pursued unnatural desire, serve as an example by undergoing a punishment of eternal fire. Yet in like manner, these people also, relying on their dreams, defile the flesh, reject authority, and blaspheme the glorious one. Every time I read this, you hear me emphasize that because that's important as we continue to go through. All right, so this is kind of where we're going to camp today. 6, 7 days, what we're trying to do, and we're tying these 3 verses together. All right, so Jude talked a lot about how we know that Jude he used 1 Enoch. He's going to directly quote from 1 Enoch when we get to verse 14. This passage that he's talking about in verse 6 here is referring back to the whole section in 1 Enoch in chapters 6 through 16. And we'll go through that here in just a minute. And 1 Enoch is an extension of what was written in Genesis 6, 1 through 4. All right? So Genesis 6, 1 through 4. And just real quickly, remember that if you were to talk to an early Israelite or a Second Temple Jew, and if you asked them why the world was what it was at the time, we would say because of Genesis 3, because of the fall. They would say, well, yeah, that's where it started, but it really starts here. It starts with the fall of the angels, the watchers. And we're going to go through this again. And then the third thing was the Tower of Babel event. So one brought death, Genesis 3. Genesis 6 brings evil into the world. And Genesis 11 with the Tower of Babel event brings chaos. So there's death, evil, and chaos. And that's what brings evil into the world as we know it today. All right. Genesis 6:1. I'm going to read this again just because. When man began to multiply on the face of the land and daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw that the daughters of men were attractive. And they took as their wives any they chose. Then God said, my spirit shall not abide in man forever, for his flesh, his days shall be 120 years. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God had sex with the daughters of men, and they bore children to them. These were the mighty men who were of old, the men of renown. Okay? 5-7. Yahweh saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every intention of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. And Yahweh regretted that he had made man on the earth, and it grieved him to his heart. So Yahweh said, I will blot out man, whom I have created from the face of the land, and man and animals and creeping things and birds of the heavens, for I am sorry that I have made them. Right after Genesis 6 is Genesis 7, which is the flood. Okay? All right. So that's Genesis 6. We've got Jude, verse 6, Genesis chapter 6, 1-4, and then now I'm going to jump over to 1 Enoch. And I'm going to be camping in chapters 6-16 of 1 Enoch. Last time we read a lot of this. I'm just going to give you a very quick summary because we need to move forward, because I want you to see this in other scripture, in canonical scripture, just like in Jude. So just a quick summary. When you look at those 10 chapters in 1 Enoch, divine angels descend to take human wives. Semyaza was the head angel of this 200 angels that descended with Azel. I always have a hard time saying that. They descended with the 200. They came down on Mount Hermon, was where they agreed to do this deed that they knew there was going to be great ramifications if they did. So it's not that they were kicked out of heaven. This was a choice. They made a choice to do this great deed. And it was to take human wives. Okay? The angels taught forsaken secrets to humans. So there's things that they start teaching to humans that were forsaken for them to teach. They teach things like metal making, crafting of weapons, methods of war, cosmology, how to make makeup and things, seductive powers. There's all using roots, cutting of roots, psychic things. These are all things that they were aware of that they brought and taught to humans. This is out of 1 Enoch. Their offspring between the divine angels that came to earth and then had sex with human women, they developed offspring that were called the Nephilim, the giants. The Nephilim caused absolute havoc on earth. So they had these evil spirits. They caused havoc among all of the earth. I mean, total devastation and destruction. This is all antediluvian. This is all pre-flood. Yahweh imprisons the fallen angel. So in Enoch, in 1 Enoch, Yahweh sends 3 of his mighty angels. He sends Raphael to deal with Azel, and he assigns to Azel, because of the things that he taught to the humans and the destruction and everything that was brought, he assigns to Azel all sin. He sends Raphael to deal with Semyaza, because Semyaza was the one who said, let's go do this thing, and got the other ones to agree to do it, and to have this relationship with women that was wrong. And then he sends Gabriel to deal with the Nephilim. And the way that he does that is that he comes down and they start fighting against each other. And they wind up destroying each other. All right? So the Nephilim begin to destroy each other. Evil spirits remain from the dead Nephilim. So when the angels have relations with women who are human, and the angels were divine, and they had this offspring, the offspring's flesh was human, but their spirit remained as divine. But because it was a spirit that was created on earth, and this unordained relationship that God did not ordain, those evil spirits remained on the earth. And that's where the demons are from. Evil spirits continue to cause havoc on earth. Right, I just flew through this much material through First Enoch, and that's real fast. And if you're hearing this for the first time, I know you think I'm crazy. Just kind of roll with me as we get into these other passages. Are there any questions about that, though? You have 1,000 questions, probably. All right.
I have one quick one.
Yeah.
Why do they ascribe that writing to Enoch? Is there the early Hebrews or the Israelites tended to think it was written by Enoch? Why did they believe that?
Okay, so like you probably don't remember this. Enoch was not written by Enoch. It is a pseudepigrapha. So Enoch was actually written by other writers.
Okay.
And first Enoch was written somewhere around 200 BC, maybe as early as 300 BC. It's one of those. It's part of the Apocrypha, and that's intertestamental writings that we know that were found with the Dead Sea Scrolls at Qumran. So Second Temple Jews, every writer of the New Testament, every writer of the New Testament is a Second Temple Jew. Every writer in the New Testament had all of this information available to them. And we now have proof of that from the Dead Sea Scrolls. So at the Dead Sea Scrolls in Qumran, they found all of the original text of the Hebrew Bibles, the Hebrew text. They also found the 54 books of the Apocrypha. And First Enoch is one of them. And First Enoch, when you look at the 54, First Enoch would have been the one that was most widely used and read by and known by all the writers. And the more and we talked about this last week, so I'm already kind of referring back to it, but when Jude is written, and we're going to get into Peter hopefully today, when Jude is written, when Peter's written, they're both written around 65, 66 AD. Nobody knew what a canon was. It wasn't whether it was canonical, it was the information that was available to them. And First Enoch was as available to them as was the Pentateuch. It was information that was available that they could use to learn and know what to use, just like we would use a commentary today. Okay? Does that answer your question, Randy?
Thank you.
So, back to Jude. Jude used the judgment of the watcher. So back to this. So now let's get back to what we're saying in Jude. Jude used the judgment of the watchers. Watchers is the term for angels. We're talking about the fallen angels. So there's good watchers. There's good angels. If you go to Daniel, in the book of Daniel, it talks about watchers. And they're good angels. They're called watchers because everybody in God's creation has a job. They have a vocation. The watcher's vocation was to watch over humankind. That's what they were supposed to do. They were supposed to be the guardian angels that were watching over humankind. These 200 agreed to do a very bad thing, and it was against God's plan and order of things. Right. The sin of the watchers. So there is a direct relationship between the sons of God choosing to leave heaven and their vocation. Again, sons of God here is referring to the angels, the fallen angels. There is a direct relationship between the sons of God choosing to leave heaven and their vocation assigned by Yahweh to come to earth and corrupt humanity by turning the hearts of humans against God's will for humankind. Because the whole deal here about Jude, this whole chapter is about this problem that's going on with false teaching. And he's making these analogies. He's using these typologies to say, just as it was done here, this is what's going on here. There's already a condemnation for this, and this is what it's going to be. Okay, let's keep going. This is why Jude thinks it's a good analogy to compare the angels that sin to the false teachers, because the angels that sin taught false teaching. Everybody still with me? Kind of, sort of? Okay. And the angels who did not stay within their own position of authority, but left their proper dwelling, he has kept in eternal chains under gloomy darkness until the judgment of that great day. Leaving home and rejecting authority demonstrates a desire for autonomy. That's what these angels did. That's the problem here. The angels that sinned blasphemed God and diminished the loyalty of the rest of the heavenly host. That's why this was so grievous. It was a slap against Yahweh and his desire and what their purpose was, and they did it anyway. And they knew when they did it what they were doing. All right? All right. I want to show you this is not just talked about in Jude. So we have this thing in Jude 6 that if you've never read it before, and if you have it, like I said earlier, I think Jim is the only one back there that has ever really got into a lesson on this. It's weird. And that's why a lot of times we just ignore it because it's weird. We don't have a very good answer for it unless you let it be what it is. All right, 2 Peter. So that's Jude. We're going to get into Peter. Again, Peter and Jude are both written somewhere, depending on what you look at. They're probably written about the same time or within a year or so of each other. I want you to notice the words that is used in Peter and how familiar they are with what was said in Jude. I really don't know which one was written first and if the one that wrote it knew what the other one said, but it kind of sort of looks like it. But you can tell that they're both coming from material that's in 1 Peter. All right. So here's 2 Peter 2 through 1. Again, this is ESV. But false prophets also arose among the people, talking about the early Israelites as they move forward. Among the people, just as there will be false teachers among you, who will secretly bring in destructive heresies, even denying the master who brought them, bringing upon themselves swift destruction. And many will follow their sensuality. Notice the term sensuality. And because of them, the way of the truth will be blasphemed. And in their greed, they will exploit you with false words. Their condemnation from long ago is not idle, and their destruction is not asleep. So he's saying way back before, there was this bad thing that happened. And what happened to them, that is still in play. Those actions, what was brought against them, is still in play today. It's not idle. It hasn't gone to sleep. It's still in play. For if God did not spare the angels when they sinned. Okay, this is in 2 Peter. For if God did not spare angels when they sinned, but cast them into hell and committed them to chains of gloomy darkness. Does that term sound familiar? Chains of gloomy darkness to be kept until the judgment. If he did not spare the ancient world, the antediluvian pre-flood, if he did not spare the ancient world, but preserved Noah, a herald of righteousness with 7 others, when he brought a flood upon the world of the ungodly, if by turning the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah to ashes, he condemned them to extinction, making them an example of what is going to happen to the ungodly, and if he rescued righteous Lot, greatly distressed by the sensual conduct of the wicked, for as that righteous man lived among them day after day, he was tormenting his righteous soul over their lawless deeds that he saw and heard. I'm hoping we get to verse 7 of Jude because we're talking about Sodom and Gomorrah. Then the Lord knows how to rescue the godly from the trials and to keep the unrighteous under punishment until the day of judgment, and especially those who indulge in the lust of defiling passion and despise authority. Are you seeing some connections, some dots? And what I'm hoping you'll do, I hope if nothing else, you want to prove me crazy. Now, I'm getting ready to get into something here in a minute. If you think I might be crazy, I will prove to you I'm crazy. But I want you to go back and study this on your own. People that are reading this, they don't have a problem with this. And that's why in Jude and in these passages in Peter, they don't give a whole lot of description. Because they don't need to. Like we talked about several weeks ago. They get it. They know the story from 1 Enoch. They know what Genesis 6, 1 through 4 means. They don't need all of this description and explanation. They understand it. Okay, but we don't. All right. How many of you in here have done a deep dive on 1 Corinthians 11? Go ahead and turn there. If you have subheadings, it's going to say head coverings. Oh, I see some grins on some faces. All right. This is a chapter that we normally stay away from. And normally when we go there, it's usually a preacher, teacher, somebody taking their cursor, on their computer, highlighting a verse or two, hitting copy, and then pasting it over into a sermon. And so they're dissecting and they're just using a section of it. Because when you put it all together, you're going, what? All right. So we're going to do Corinthians 1 through 15. I will be amazed if we make it through this today. But we're going to attempt to do this. Disclaimer, and to the video. We don't have any youngins in here. I'm going to have to talk about sex today. And I hope you're okay with that. And if I offend anybody, I don't mean to, and I'll tell you right now, I'm sorry. But I've got to take you someplace here. And hopefully you'll see what I'm talking about here in a minute. All right. Heads, hair, hats, and angels. What do those have in common? That's what I thought. Okay.
We all have one.
Well, you see why I married her? Yeah. Okay. So heads, hair, hats, and angels. And this is what we're going to be talking about. So I do need to bring this up about the ESV. I'm using the ESV. There's going to be if your version it's probably going to say women everywhere. ESV will say women some places. You'll see it in here. At some places it says wives, and that's an important distinction. I believe, and others believe, that I'm kind of studying some of this material from. That's a more proper use from the original Greek. So study it on your own. But so you'll see. So if you in your text, as I'm reading along up here, you'll see some places where it says wife. Yours may say woman. All right. Enough about that. Here we go. Here's the other thing. Because of the angels. I'm giving you the punchline kind of right now up front, because as we read through this the first time, Paul is writing this so that we had Jude, we had Peter, and now we have Paul talking about the fallen angels, about the angels. In the middle of this, Paul's going to say, all of this is because of the angels. So as I start to read this, I want you thinking that up front, because of the angels. Now here we go. Now I command you, because you remember me in everything and maintain the traditions, even as I deliver them to you. But I want you to understand that the head of every man is Christ, the head of a wife is her husband, and the head of Christ is God. That's the verse that gets pulled out and used a lot. To do what?
Keep women down.
There you go. Okay. And here we often tie this to authority. Okay, there's a little truth to that, but it also has a lot to do with order. So just keep that in thought as we go through. All right, we're going to come back to that in a minute. Every man who prays or prophesies with his head covered dishonors his head, but every wife who prays or prophesies with her head uncovered dishonors her head, since it is the same as if her head were shaven. For if a wife will not cover her head, then she should cut her hair short. But since it is disgraceful for a wife to cut off her hair or shave her head, let her cover her head. Are you with me? This is all making perfect sense, right? Okay. For a man ought to cover his head, since he is the image and glory of God, but woman is the glory of man. For a man was not made from woman, but woman from the man. That is why a wife ought to have a symbol of authority on her head, because of the angels. Now, does that make perfect sense to you? I dare you, I double dog dare you, to go home, sit down, and read this 300 times, and using our thought pattern, our knowledge of science and medicine, and the way we interpret things and the way we look at things within our tradition, and make this make sense. There's been many a commentary that has tried. The ones I have read fail miserably because it doesn't make any sense. But wait, that's not all. Nevertheless, in the Lord, woman is not independent of man, nor man of woman. For as woman was made from man, so man is now born of woman. And all things are from God. Judge for yourselves. That's a weird statement from Paul, especially if he's getting on to them about something. Judge for yourselves. Is it proper for a wife to pray to God with her head uncovered? And this is key. Does not nature itself teach you that if a man wears long hair, it is a disgrace for him? But if a woman has long hair, it is her glory. For her hair is given to her for a covering. Doesn't that all just fall right into place and make perfect sense about why women should cover their hair? No, it doesn't. It's absolutely ridiculous. Now I'm going to tell you something more ridiculous. This is the part you're going to throw me out the door. I will be tarred and feathered, and you've probably never heard this.
What's that last word be?
You don't read Greek?
Yeah.
It's not written in Greek.
Beyond me.
No, I'm sorry. I should have. Parabolion. That is the Greek word for covering. And I'm just not going to have time to get into what all that means, and it's really weird. But, okay. So here we go. I'm going to do the best that I can with this at the time that we have allotted. And it's okay for you to think I'm absolutely insane. The first time I heard this, I thought it was crazy. But the more I thought about it, and the more I have read this, I can't tell you how many times. And you know what? It makes perfect sense. If you put everything in context. All right. So I'm not asking you to believe this. I'm just asking you to think about this. Let's go back. We talked a lot about worldview. And we talked a lot about hermeneutics when we did our previous study. And all of that is looking at the world as the writer saw things in his or her mind as they're writing, and the world in which they lived to the people to which they were writing to about a message that they wish to deliver. If you don't use proper hermeneutics, you can't really understand Scripture to the fullest. We try and take it, what is written in English version, through our 21st century minds and make sense of it from our knowledge of science and everything else. All right, so here, Greco-Roman. If you went back to the first century, when this was written, back then, what they knew about science, what they knew about medicine, was a lot different than what we know about medicine and science today. Anybody ever heard of the Hippocratic Oath? Anybody in here a doctor? Any doctors in the house? If you're a doctor, you take the Hippocratic Oath. So that all stems back from Hippocrates and the Hippocratic medical journals that was written by him way back here, way back. That's the world so their knowledge of medicine and science was based on that. I can give you the guy's name. It's Troy Martin. If you come up to me later, I can give you his book where he dissects this and breaks it all down. So I'm going to give you a very quick rendition of what's going on here. So back then, this is what they believed. And their world, the way babies are born, is different than the way we think babies are born. And I'm going to get a little graphic, but I'm not going to get as graphic as I probably should. But their males and female both have semen. And the semen is produced up here in the head. And a male's semen travels not inside the body, but through hair follicles. In fact, the hair is developed from that semen. It's hollow, and the semen fills the hair, and it travels down below. And for a male, it goes into the storage tanks, where it is then ejected into the female. That's how semen traveled. And males have hair here, hair all here, for that to travel down. On the reverse side of that, once the semen is in the woman, the semen has to get up to here because that's where that comes together. Even though the baby's developed in the uterus, so the semen has to travel back up through the hair follicles. Women don't have hair here, and here. It travels through their hair on their head. I'm getting some real. I wish I could have just taken a picture just then. It was. I would put it on Facebook somewhere. It was just marvelous. I want you to think through that, and that is absolutely 100% ridiculous. And today we would like think of it, but just there was once a time that people thought the world was flat. Okay, so just let's cut them some slack.
That makes more sense.
But I want you just for a minute just to play along with me, okay? This is just giving you science fiction today. But just play around with that thought for a moment. What if that were true? What if that's what they thought? What if that was the science of the day, which I can prove it was science of the day? If that was the science of the day, and that's what they thought about how babies are produced, does that change this at all? Does everybody kind of get the physics of what I'm talking about? There's a lot more, but I'm not going to get too deep into that. All right. So if you think of it that way, the woman's head, the woman's hair, this covering, in essence, becomes a form of or part of her genitalia. And that's why a woman's hair has to be covered, especially when she's praying or prophesying. Okay? A husband, the whole thing about the length of the hair, a man, it's disgraceful for a man to have long hair. See, my dad always threw that at me when I was in high school because I had hair down to here. It's disgraceful for a man to have long hair. Well, the reason it's disgraceful is because the thing that he brings to the table is the original, where the semen originates. It originates up here. If he has long hair, the semen stays up here because it can't travel down the front of his body. That's what they believed. So that's why it was disgraceful for men to have long hair, but it was also disgraceful for women to have short hair. All right, we're going to read it again. And I just want you to just play along with me, okay?
Can we take a deep breath first?
Is there anything about that that you want to ask that I can clarify? And it's okay to call me crazy. It's okay but do you kind of get what I'm saying?
You're saying that when the people were writing the scriptures that we believe are in the canon of the Bible,
Mhm.
they were writing,
When Paul
was writing,
wrote Corinthians,
he believed those things?
yes. Now I can't prove that Paul specifically believed that. I'm just saying there is evidence to show that was the Greco-Roman, that was their culture. And that was the medical journals of the day. The Hippocratic medical journal of the day would definitely lay that out.
And he didn't have to explain this because
That's it.
everybody would
I
know.
wouldn't have to explain to you how a baby's made, right?
Right.
I hope not.
So he didn't feel the need.
He didn't feel the need.
Yeah, it'd been a little awkward.
But the reason Paul what's Paul addressing here? Order of worship, what to do in church, what's proper, what's not proper. He starts out with talking about the traditions. The church is brand new. You know, we're talking about planting a church. Paul's planting first churches. And we talked ad nauseum in this class about the problems of trying to bring together Jews and Gentiles. To throw on top of that, not just that, but all the culture and everything that's going on. These are all huge problems that Paul has to address. And they're huge problems. All right?
One more.
Yep.
This is okay.
Donna, come here. You have to.
No, I'm okay. So, does this carry over to the Muslim faith? What they do coverings and things?
I have no clue.
Okay.
I don't. I mean, I could give you what I think, but I'm not going to do that because I don't know. And I wouldn't have anything to back it up. So
The men cover their heads.
I'm not going there. Okay, let's keep going because I want to try real hard to get. Okay, so let's reread this again with what I just said. Now I commend you because you remember me and everything and maintain the traditions of God. But I want you to understand that the head of every man is Christ, the head of a wife is her husband, and the head of Christ is God. When you look at this, he's talking more about unity Is God over Christ? Is there an authority thing there about God? God is the boss over Christ? That's not what he's taught. There's unity within that bond and that relationship between God and Christ. There is a bond. There is a unity between a husband and a wife. They're one. This really doesn't talk about I'm the boss over you. That's the concept I want to get out of your head, if I can. And then there's a lot of other places to go to talk about that. All right. But keep that in line with what he's talking about as we walk through this. Every man who prays or prophesies teaches. With his head covered, dishonors his head. But every wife who prays or prophesies with her head uncovered dishonors her head. You can almost read that based on the previous chapter. Every man who prays or prophesies with his head covered dishonors God. Okay? But every wife who prays or prophesies with her head uncovered dishonors her husband. Hold that thought. Since it is the same as if her head were shaven. For if a wife, not just a woman, but if a wife will not cover her head, if she will not cover this part, then she should cut her hair short, because it's a dishonor to have her head uncovered, because it's part of the genitalia. But since it is disgraceful for a wife to cut off her hair or shave her head, let her cover her head. She should have the hair, because the hair is her glory. So let's keep going. That's what it's going to say. For a man ought not to cover his head, since he is the image and glory of God. But woman is the glory of man. For man was not made from woman, but woman from man. That is why a wife ought to have a symbol of authority on her head, because of the angels. What Paul is saying, what he's concerned about, is that a wife and a husband have formed together to form a unity. And that's honorable, and that's exactly the order and what God wanted and desired. Paul's concern is that he knows the story of the fallen angels. He knows the story of First Enoch, where the angels saw the daughters of humankind and they were attractive. And what started the whole thing was them wanting to have sex with the women and to have offspring. Paul knows if that happened back there, wants to keep it from happening again. Especially now that Jesus has died, been resurrected, and gone on to be in heaven. The dark side's not happy. And that's why there's all of this persecution. If you go in, the persecution really begins when all of the disciples and the churches start to split and go out after Pentecost. And they're sent out and sent away. Paul knows that there is spiritual warfare that's going on. What he's doing here is trying to protect the women. He's wanting the women to show a sign of authority, not meaning that the husband is the boss of or in control of the woman, but that she is united with him. She's taken, and they are one. And the angels will see that and know that. Is that making any sense?
Yeah.
Okay? I'm trying to avoid 16 other rabbit holes or rabbit trails here, because I could tell you how a lot of people interpret a lot of this, but I'm trying to keep us here as much as I can, because we're running out of time. So let's just keep going. So keep that thought, and I know I'm jumping. Nevertheless, in the Lord, woman is not independent of man, nor man of woman. For as woman was made from man, so man is now born of woman. And all things are from God. This thing about judge for yourselves. So now he's saying to them, basically when this question comes up, he says, judge for yourselves. Is it proper for a wife to pray to God with her head uncovered? Seems like an odd question. Then he answers by saying, does not nature itself, science, okay? That's where he's bringing this all in. Does not science, does not nature, does not what you understand about nature and how all of this that I've just been talked about, how this all works. Does nature itself teach you that if a man wears long hair, it is a disgrace for him, but if a woman has long hair, it is her glory? For her hair is giving to her for a cover. That's her glory, is the ability to procreate. The man, procreate. Wife, procreate. Short hair, procreate. Woman, long hair, procreate. It makes her more attractive. It makes her more fertile. It's her glory. Okay? So we're already running out of time. I'm probably going to stop right there because I would beg to go back with that kind of that thought process in mind. Read through this several times. I don't know how many times I had to read through this. The first time just to try and see if I could get to how ridiculous it is the way I try and understand it using today's medicine and science and everything. But then after I got this thing about what they knew about medicine and how babies were born, all of a sudden this changed for me. And I started to understand it. I don't want to get into this next section because I want to get back to Peter when we're going to 1 Peter. A passage that is very familiar to you, but maybe you'll hear it a little bit different way than what we had before. So, any questions, comments? Randy?
The idea of the head covering, I mean, the last sentence there says a woman's hair is her covering. I think historically, when we read that, we tend to think of maybe something else covering the head, like a shawl, like a hat, like a whatever. And some religions still practice that instead.
Go ahead.
But there's also the concept of a woman's head is her husband. So is there some correlation there of her covering being her husband? Do you follow me there?
Okay, so the first part of what you said, this is the part where this passage contradicts itself. If you look here, it says, for her hair is giving to her for a covering. Here it says, but every wife who prays or prophesies with her head uncovered dishonors her head. They contradict each other. Right? This is saying that if she prays or prophesies with her head uncovered, she dishonors her head. Which, while you were just saying, if you look at it from the previous verse about every wife's head is her husband, again, that's that union, that unity relationship between the two. Not that one's over the other, but that they're in unity. They're both taken. He's taken by her and she's taken by him. They both belong to each other. It's not that she's his property. And a lot of times that's how this is used. She's his property to do with her as he pleases.
And her head is her husband, right?
That's yep. But the way we think about it, I'm very sensitive, I guess if you can't tell. I work with Genesis Women's Shelter and with lots of other things. I get testy when I get to this whole thing about women's roles and authorities and who's boss over who. And I have seen this misused so much. There's what's called spiritual abuse. And this is a passage that is commonly used in spiritual abuse. You're my wife. You'll do what I say, when I say, how I say, because I'm boss over you. So when we look at the terms, I think we just need to be careful how we use them. And when I go back to that verse, me personally, I want you to understand that the head of every man is Christ, the head of a wife is her husband, and the head of Christ is God. To me, that's more of an order of things. there was God, and there was the Father and the Son, and then man was created, and this goes on later in this passage to talk about that. Man was created from man, woman was created. It doesn't mean that she's subordinate to him. It just means that she was made from him to be a suitable, and we use the word helper. The word, it's actually, the Hebrew word is azer, and it's not, it's used completely different than what we typically hear it interpreted when we think of the word helper. The Hebrew word azer, as it's used in other places within the text, I forget how many times it's used. Most of the times where it's used elsewhere, it's speaking of God, speaking of Yahweh. So anyway, not to get too far off on that, but does that answer your question? I don't know if that
Partly. Would someone in that
culture.
culture have taken the head covering to mean hair only, or would she feel a need to, cover her head with a physical covering other than her own hair?
So they would feel the need to cover the hair with, yes, to be covered. In fact, if you,
Married women.
huh?
Married women.
Yes, thank you for saying that, because I meant to tell somebody.
Ridiculous.
Yes, thank you, because I meant for somebody to tell me if I ever do that, because I will correct me. Because I'm very sensitive to that. I have a 39-year-old single daughter that, the abuse that she's taken because of certain passages like this. In fact, I was just with her this weekend, and it just sends me to tears to think about it. So that's another whole long story. But so yes, so wives would have covered their head. If you go back to the Greco-Roman world and the way their culture was, the whole thing about how prostitutes, the way they adorned themselves, and the way they did their hair. So there was just certain things that were just socially acceptable and things that were not. But that's not to get off too much on this. But the main thing I'm trying to say is, if you get nothing else out of this, you need to be careful when you're reading a passage today and just try and read it with our knowledge and our base and say, well, this is what this, I have to make sense out of this based on what it says. That's what it says. Okay, but what did it mean? And what did it mean back there to that audience by the person that was writing it? And what exactly was that person trying to get to? I'll just take you right back. It's because of the angels. That whole section, 1 through 15 in Corinthians, it's because of the angels. So now that's your starting point. You start there. Now what? So okay. So what? How does this all kind of go back to? Again, if you want to get into this deep, I can give you Troy Martin's guy's name, and I can get you a link to a book, an article. There was a series of debates. It was around between 2004 and 2013. So this was all material that was, from a scholarship standpoint, was peer reviewed. It's fascinating. Anything else?
I think the significance of head of wife to your husband and using a head is just so perfect, because imagine if it was cut off. Like, you can cut off other limbs and things, but that unity is pretty spelled out. That's what I think when I read that.
And then you gotta look at Christ and God's relationship. That's the perfect example of what we described here. It's interesting how God the Father and Christ share authority. And it's interesting how the Father said all authority judgment has been given to the Son. I mean, okay, so look, what does that do to this relationship when God the Father gives all this authority to Christ? Just, if you set somebody free, they're free.
If you can get your head wrapped around what I'm going through, you're going to be amazed how it's going to open up other passages. And you're going to go, oh. So, and this part right here, Jesus' priestly prayer, John 17. There's a part, I can't remember the exact verse, but in there where Jesus says, Father, he's praying for his disciples. I pray that they become one, as you and I are one, so that they may become one with you. When he's saying one there, he's not saying, I pray that they become 10% like me so they can become 3% like you. I'm praying that they will become 100% like me as I'm 100% like you, so they will become 100% like you through me. Changes everything.
So 1 Corinthians 14 should be interesting. Women remain silent.
That's another whole topic that I would love to get into, but we're going to struggle with this one. But I want the thing here. I want you to see how this. I'm not taking this in isolation. I'm taking the whole section and I'm rolling it over into other passages, and that's proper hermeneutics. When you see something weird, okay, run to it. We say that the Bible was inspired. If the Bible was inspired and God has a reason for writing something to the person that he's having to write it, it's there for a reason. Why is it there? And sometimes you have to go read it and say, okay, so how does this fit the story? Where is this in the mosaic of things? How does this apply over here? Can I start connecting some dots? Is there other material that I can use that's not canonical that helps me know something about the culture and the time and the worldview when Paul's writing this into the people that he's writing about? Yes, it's okay to do that. Nobody's leaving, so other questions? I'll stay here all day. I love this stuff. I'm crazy as a bat. So thank you. Come back next week, it gets better.
That's just blowing my mind.